Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Okay, and essentially what I want to talk about today is going to be the second video in this introduction to web development. Okay, and then again, if I didn't really mention this before, okay, if you want to find more resources, like find like all my videos and video playlists, you can head over to devnursery.com. Okay, and here at devnursery.com, you can find like all these links to the different playlists I have on different topics. You can find cheat sheets, blog tutorials, and you can join the Slack and Discord communities where you can meet other, aspiring developers and find a support system and all that good stuff. So just so you know, you have this resource, and then that's there. Okay, cool. But what I want to talk about this time is continuing on where we left off before. Is this time I want to focus on navigation. So basically, we're gonna put off like JavaScript for a bit, and we're going to be focusing on HTML and CSS. So last time we created this index.html file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take out all the CSS and JavaScript from this file, okay? Because we're eventually going to introduce secondary files, okay? But bottom line is that essentially the way this is working is that when it comes to an HTML page without any kind of JavaScript, there's only two ways that a user can interact with a web page. They can either click a link or they can submit a form. Those are really the only two ways that a user can interact with a web page absent any kind of JavaScript. Okay, so you can do a lot with just links and forms. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. Now what I want to focus on today is how to build a navigation. So we're going to just start from sort of like at the top of a web page and start building sort of familiar web page type elements. So for example, what I mean here, if I go to like zappos.com, when we take a look at their structure, you see like how like their top of the website is like you have like there's multiple bars. We're just going to stick kind of like to this area right here. So you see here you have like this little area here with like a search bar and like my cart, and then here you have like your actual navigation menu. Okay, so we're going to create something similar to this, not exactly like this, but we're going to use this kind of as our model. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of delete all the HTML. And basically we're going to open this up with live server so that way we can see the blank page. So there's our site. Okay. And we're going to see how all of this works. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say we're going to create a link to, we're going to make another file called other.html just to show you like how links work. Okay. Even though I accidentally created a folder called other.html. So let's fix that. I want to click here, create a file, other.html. Then again, I can click the exclamation point to use Emmet to help me do a shortcut to setting up my HTML boilerplate. And here we'll just say, hey, H1 you got here in the body. Okay, we'll keep it real simple. Okay, so all our links will just link to that page, just as a placeholder. Okay, wonderful. Now index.html. Okay, so bottom line is this, we're going to follow a strategy. Whenever we think of our website, we're going to think of each section of the website as a row. So you see here we have two rows. Okay, we have row number 1 and then row number 2. Okay, so we're going to create, and then for each row of the website, so when you think of your website and you think of sort of like each division of the website, we're going to use an element, a block element called a div. Okay, so right now we're going to talk about two rows, so we're going to have two divs. Two divisions of the website. Okay. Generally, they're your simplest block level element. They just represent a chunk of a block of a website. Okay. Now, in order to be able to distinguish between the two of them, we'll give them a class. Okay. So we'll give this one the class of, we'll call it let's take a look at the Zappos page. We'll call this like the logo bar because that's where the logo exists. And we'll call this like the nav bar. Okay. So we'll call this like logo bar. And then we'll call this one class nav bar. Okay, navigation bar. Okay, and so essentially this is going to represent those two rows. Okay, and we'll build each one out one by one. Okay, now what's going to happen is that we're going to want to style this. We're going to want to determine, so first we'll kind of sketch it out. So basically when we take a look here, what I see is three things. The image, like a form, okay, and basically my cart. So the way I'm going to look at this is that I say, okay, see this big gap here? Okay, so the way I think about this is one chunk of stuff here, and then this is one chunk of stuff here, and I'm pushing them off to the sides, and you're going to see how we do that. So whenever I see that pattern, like this big white space in the middle between two things, the idea is that this is one block, and this is two blocks. So in that row that I've created, I'm going to want two more blocks, so two more divs. Okay, think of every building block as a div. There's other tags that can do the same thing. They're literally just divs with different names, but we're going to just start with div to keep it simple. So just think div is a block of my website. So in this case, when I take a look at that row, it's called the logo bar. I see there's really going to be like two blocks. Okay, this and this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to say, okay, here's div 1. Okay, and we're just going to call this class equals, and this is that's on the left, so we'll call that the left. And then another div that represents the right. Okay, class equals right. Okay, just so that we have labels on them, and it allows us to target them when we use our CSS. Okay, and then this should be on the left bar, on the left block. What did we see? We saw a logo. So let me go. I'll just right click here and get the image address, copy image address. I'm gonna say image. Source of the image is that URL. Now, generally for image tags, you also want to include an alt property. The alt property is a text that shows up when you hover over an image. This is also useful when you have people who are using like assisted devices, like if they're blind and they're using a reader for the page, they're not going to be able to see the picture, but the reader will tell them what the alt property says. Okay, so we'll just say, hey, like Zappos logo. Okay, cool. So now let's take a look. Does it show up on our website? Yep, there it is. Okay, so you see it's a little big, not ideal. Okay, but what else do we see inside this like left chunk? Okay, so again, right now we're operating in this row. So that's our logo bar row. Okay, and then we had a right block inside of that block and a right block. So left and right. So in the left block so far I have the logo, but it looks like I should also have this like little form here. Okay, so let's build out a form. Okay, so we're going to sit there and say, and then forms are done via a input. So basically what you would do is we're just going to put an input tag, and every input, there's a bunch of different types of inputs. You determine which one it is based on its type. So we're going to say, hey, input of type text. That means it's a text input, and we're just going to leave it at that. We're not going to really make working forms right now. And then we're going to have another input of type equals submit. That's the submit button. Okay, and now when I look at it, let's go back to our page. You can see there, like there it is, Zappos. Then the form and submit button. Okay, so kind of like that, but again, not quite looking like that. Okay, and then on the right, we have that box that basically we just see a button. Okay, this is my cart. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is then go inside this right div, and then we're just going to make a button that says my cart. Okay, now notice how my cart's here in the bottom, because right now they're two blocks, and again, blocks stack on top of each other. Okay, so we're going to want to change that. So let's actually like style this row before we go any further. Okay, so how we're going to style this, we're going to want to create a CSS file. So instead of styling in the HTML file, because everything is really cluttered if you do everything in one file, what we're going to do is we're going to create a CSS file. And that way I can use it on multiple pages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file. We'll call this styles.css. Okay, and now what I want to do is connect this file. Now, a really useful tool is what you do is you do what's called an all selector. So whenever you do the asterisk, it means select everything. And what you're going to do is you're going to do an outline, which is, we're going to make it 3 pixels solid gold. Okay, and this is just going to be, it's not something for our website to make our website look better. It's going to be something to help us kind of figure out what we're doing with our website. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. Okay, and also help us know that we connect this right. So now that I have that in my file, okay, I'm going to head back to my index.html. Generally, you're going to want to link all your files in your head tag, because again, body should only have stuff that deals with the appearance of your website, like the actual content. And then head should have, again, all the meta stuff. So referencing other files that should be linked to this document should be in here. Now to link a CSS file, you're going to use a link tag. So if I start typing in link, Emmet's going to help me and give me a list of already different types of common link tags, because there's different reasons you'd use a link tag. Like if you wanted to create like a favicon is this little icon right here. So if you wanted to like link it to an image to use as the favicon, okay, that would be that you would just do that link tag. We're linking to a CSS file, so we're going to want to use that one. But you can see there's like different ones. Okay. So link CSS, and it says like, hey, what type of link tag this is? Hey, I'm linking to a style sheet, so a CSS style sheet, and then here's the name of the file. Okay, this isn't the same exact name as my file. Okay, so I want to make sure that it matches. Okay, and since they're in the same folder, because right now they're right next to each other, I can just put the name. Okay, if it was like in a subfolder, then I'd have to change that up a little bit, or depending on where I have it. Okay. So that should work. So now when I go to here, so you see the gold outline. Okay, so what the gold outline does allows us to see where one block ends and one block begins, or one element begins. Okay, so I can see, hey, here's my image, and then I can see that, hey, these three things are kind of in this row right here. It just kind of helps you kind of see where things end, so I can see the different rows. Okay, now what I want is, so like if I examine my HTML right now, and I go to elements, I can see here in the logo bar is a div, and there's two divs inside of it. So I can see if I highlight logo bar, that's the space that it takes up. And inside of it, there's this and this. But I want these two things to be on the same row. Okay? So generally when you want things inside of, so if I want everything inside of logo bar, every block inside of logo bar to be not stacked on top of each other, but to be stacked side by side, you need to change the behavior of that logo bar div. Okay, and what you want to do is change its display property from being a block element to what's called a flex box. So what a flex box is going to do is just going to line things up left and right. So let's do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to target based on that class. So I'm going to go to my style sheet. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to create a rule for anything that has a class of logo bar. Again, the dot means class. Okay, logo bar. And what I'm going to say that anything that has a class logo bar should have a display property of flexbox. And what that's going to do is going to make everything kind of line up. See now, let me refresh the page. I don't quite have the desired effects. Oh, it's not called flexbox, it's flex. There we go. Okay, and there you go. So you see now they're side by side. So you see like the left div and the right div are now on the same row. Right now they still look a little bit like a mess. Okay, doesn't have quite the intended look. Okay, so we're gonna have to do a couple things to kind of fix that. First off, we want this block, so we want the left block to stay to the left, and we want the right block to be flushed to the right. Okay, the way you do that is that when you have a flex box, there's a property called justify content, and justify content will determine how that thing is behaved. So I could center them, and that'll center both blocks. So you see now both blocks are into center. Or what I want to do is do space in between. Okay, and what space between does is says, okay, so I'm going to put equal space between them. Okay, so when there's only two elements, the effect is that it puts all the space in the middle between this block, the left block, and the right block. Okay, that kind of is the effect that we see here, right? So we have this block pushed all the way to the left, and this block pushed all the way to the right. Okay, so that's essentially how you achieve that. But when I take a look at it, like, wait a second, this is all still kind of flushed all the way to the left. And when I take a look at Zappos website, see like there's like this nice little blank space here. That we can achieve through by giving it width. Okay. So what we can do is we can say, hey, we want to give the flex box width, and we'll say like the width is 85%. So 85% of the screen. And when I take a look at that, okay, and I highlight that logo bar. So now it's only taking up 85% of the width. You see like it ends here now. But it's still flush to the left. I want it to be centered. How do I center the block? So when you have so I could center the things inside the block because it's a flex box using justify content. But if I want to center the actual block itself, you do that with a margin. And the trick is you just say auto. And what it does, it auto calculates the left and right margin, so that way it's centered. Okay, and see now it's centered. Okay, still not looking quite like this, but now we see hey, we got this space over here and we got this space over here. Okay, next thing is like this image is like way too big. Okay, so we want to shrink that. So next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do logo bar. Now a little thing you can do to make sure that your CSS selectors are more specific, because again you want to be specific to make sure that you're not overlapping and creating what's called a cascade. That's why these are called cascading style sheets. Okay, so basically if I think about this logo bar div, inside the image tag is inside of this div that has a class of left, which is inside of this div that has a class of logo bar. So I can express that in my style sheet by doing dot logo bar dot left image. Okay, and what this means is that this image applies to any image tag that's inside of a left class thing that is inside of a logo bar thing. Okay, so I'm dictating sort of like the things that have to be true. So it has to be an image tag, has to be inside of an element that has a class of left, and that element with the class of left has to be inside of a element with the class of logo bar. If those three things aren't true, then it doesn't apply. And again, the more complicated the rule is, the more points it gets. So you see right now it has like 21 points. Okay, so again, if there was another rule that applied that had less points, this rule would win. Okay, so now what do I want to do with this rule? I just want to like resize the image. So we're going to say the height of the image is, we'll just fix it, do it fix is 100 pixels. Let's see how it looks now. And you see it's starting to look a little bit better. Okay, awesome. Okay, now that's all fine and good. Let's see here. Probably want to make that a little smaller. Let's see if we can find, let's use the inspect tool. Let's just see how like tall they made this. So that's 50 pixels tall. So let's make that 50 pixels. 50 pixels. Let's go back over here. Okay, and you start to kind of see that. Now let's create this search bar. Okay, so the search bar we have like right there. Okay, so now I want to target those inputs. So again, I'm going to start with the logo bar left because we're still operating out of that div. Okay, so we're going to have the inputs. Now there's both of those are inputs, the submit button and the submit button and the text bar. I don't want to target both of them. So what I can do is I can specify based on attributes. So I can say, hey, I want to target the input that has the type attribute of text. Okay. So that'll target the text bar, and then I can create another one that'll target the submit bar. Now there's going to be some things that are going to be the same for both of them. So I might want to have another one that's for things that are similar. Because again, why do I want to write the same thing twice? So this one will just apply to all inputs. So this one will apply to both because they're both input tags. This one will apply specifically to the text bar. This one will apply specifically to the submit button because basically the square brackets are used to specify any attributes. And we can see here that this input has an attribute of type. So I can target that in my CSS. Okay, so for both of them, maybe what we want to do is create like a margin. So there's margin and then there's padding, which actually padding is what I want to do. So padding is always on the inside. So basically what you're doing is you're saying the space from the edge of the block going in from the content inside the block. So the way I think about it is like if we were in a padded cell in an insane asylum, where's the padding? On the inside of the cell or the outside of the cell? It's on the inside. While margin is like the distance between the box and things outside the box. Okay. So we'll say padding and we'll just say like 8 pixels. Okay, let's take a look at that. So you can see like, hey, look, it got a little bit bigger. Okay, cool. Let me take a look at the one on the original. Okay. Yeah. And then looks like it's like a little wider. So maybe we'll make it a little wider. Well, not from there because we only want to make the text box wider. So we'll say width 200 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Makes it a little bit longer. Maybe let's double that. 400. Okay. And then you see like you could use some space. Like right now it's like little two nestled against the Zappos. So for both actually we don't necessarily want it around. How do they have it? They have them like both like flush to each other. So really what we want, okay, is for the text input to have a margin. How should I do that? There's a couple different ways I could do this. I can go put them in another div and then have that div have the margin, which would probably be the smart way to go. So that would mean me going back here and then grouping these two elements by putting them inside their own div or form tag. Okay, and then I'll give this a class of form. And then if I save that, okay, let me go over here to styles, and then we just add that now. So that's because now it's gotta match up to be accurate. Because now the input's no longer inside the left element; it's inside of an element that has it's inside of a div that has a class of form, which is inside of a div with a class of left, which is inside of a div with a class of logo bar. Okay, and then over here, same thing. Dot form. Okay. So now what I can do is I can target the form dot. Well, let me just do the whole thing again. You want to be specific. The benefit of being specific is it's less likely to collide. I could have just targeted the form class, but then what if I use a form class somewhere else? You know. So you have to kind of ask yourself like, how much do you want this particular rule set to be reused? Okay. So in this case, what I do is I want margin, we'll say like 10 pixels around those. Now, why did it do that? Oh, the reason being is that left is not a flex box. So now, so you could see this is. Wait, where did the form go? Okay, here we go. So the div, so this is the div. This is now because before the inputs are inline elements, so they all stayed in line. So what I want to do is change how this block behaves, and we'll just make this a flex as well. So display flex. So that way, well, that doesn't actually help with that particular situation. I need to change the left box to be a flex. Dot logo bar dot left, because the logo bar is where the two blocks are, the image and the div with the two form elements. So dot left display flex, and then we should be back in action. So there we go. Okay, so now simply you see now like now this is too big. Okay, so margin width. Just make sure that the input doesn't get too high. So height, we'll say 50 pixels. It's probably still too much. Yeah. 20 pixels. Okay, but you see this like now, and then okay, the image also lost its styling, so we need to go back and revisit why that's the case. So where is the height? Okay, yeah, because it's no longer. Oh, I put the form there. It's not inside of the form div. So let's get rid of that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's looking a bit better. Okay, so that's good. And then now we have the My Cart button. And we could go back and style the button and make it all pretty and whatnot. So we can go back here to the button, the submit button, and start saying, okay, hey, we want padding in the button of, let's say, 5 pixels. That'll just gives the button a little bit more of a girthy look. So see, like now that text is no longer so claustrophobic inside the button. Okay, and then let's make the button background. Well, let's get rid of the border, because the border always makes the button look ugly. So we'll just get rid of that. The button should already start looking nicer. So you see the button's already starting to look nicer. And again, anytime I want to get rid of these like yellow borders, I can just go over here in my inspect tool and just like click it off. Okay, and you can kind of see the effect that's happening. Okay, cool. Okay, and again, we can make the font a little bit bigger, so we can say font size, 2 EMs. Now 2 EMs, what that is, it's a percentage of the current element's font size. So it takes whatever the current font size is and multiplies that. So when I say 2 EMs, I'm saying 200% the current font size. Okay, so that'll be different from different browsers and different size screens, what the font size is. So it's a more of a relative size unit versus pixels, which are absolute. So it doesn't matter what the size of the screen is, it's going to use that number. So oftentimes people are going to look at things on different size screens, and you want your website to be responsive. So you generally want to use relative measurements. Okay, well, see, that's too big. That's too big. Okay, so let's do like 1.2 EMs. Okay, that's fine. We'll go with that. Okay, and then we can keep working on it, like background color of the button can be like aquamarine. Let's see how that looks. That's ugly color. I have this like little like extension in my Google Chrome that allows me like to use this color picker. So now I can go over here and just try to get that exact blue from Zappos. Okay, so I clicked on that, and now I can go back over here, and it'll give me the actual color code. So I can just copy that. And instead of saying aquamarine, I can just put in the hex. So I'll put in hash and then the number. And there we go. So let's see how that looks now. Yeah, that works, but that black doesn't contrast very well. And a cool thing you can do is if I use this tool right here and I click on that and I highlight the button, it'll tell me like it usually tells me like the contrast of the colors. So right now it's not telling me about that. Sometimes it does. Okay. But we're going to want to change the font color because that color isn't going to work. So we'll choose like Alice Blue. There's really light blue here. That looks nice or sounds nice. And yeah, that looks nice. See, that looks like a lot better. So now if I take off the outline, look at that. That looks nice. Okay. And maybe, you know what? I like the style of that. I'm going to apply that to the button as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a comma here. And then I can just do, okay, let's target that button. Let's target that button. Logo bar. Except the button is in the right section. So .right. And we'll say button. Okay. And then if I go over here, see now my cart looks like that. The only issue is that the my cart button is kind of like flustered to the top. So maybe what I want to do is we're going to want to style that. So go dot logo bar dot left, not dot right, button. Okay, and then what I want to do is kind of see like, okay, how is this being styled? So if I take a look at this, so the button's there being flushed to the top. And if I take a look at the div right, what I want to do is push it down. So one way I can just push it down is sometimes if you just need to align something, what you can do is you can actually target the container. Even though there's only one block in the container, it may be still worth making it a display flex. Why? Because I can do to adjust, basically justify content, as we saw, align things horizontally. But there's another thing called align. I think what I do is align items, and that'll allow me to change how it is vertically. And what I want to do is put at the bottom, which should be, I think, flex end, and that should move it to the bottom. Okay, but you see, like that's too far to the bottom. So maybe I want to center it. So then we try center. And that's the great thing about flex boxes. They make it really easy to align things. Okay, and see, that's looking a bit better. Okay, so see like that. You're trying to see like how we get that sort of navigation bar effect. Okay. So when you compare that to this, you can see the sign effect. Again, I can try to copy like the same color of the border and try to get the right text in there, but you're kind of seeing the idea. Okay. So now that row is done. Okay. Now if I want to make this like my cart button link to somewhere, because right now it doesn't. And see, right now when I look at them, they don't change. They don't have any feedback for me. I would like to make it where like I feel like they're clickable. So oftentimes, sometimes what's really useful is what's called a transition. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm on the submit button and the buttons, I'm going to put a transition. And I'm going to say that whenever a transition, a change of state occurs, okay, specifically on the color, so that's the font color, a transition should happen over 0.3 seconds. And the same thing with background color. Background color, 0.3 seconds. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another rule. So I'm going to create another CSS rule. And what I'm going to use what's called a pseudo selector. So I'm going to say, hey, I want to select the submit button, but I want to select it when, and there's all these different types of pseudo selectors here. So what I'm looking for is when it's like hovered. So it should be H for hover. Again, there's a lot of them to learn. CSS you can learn forever. Same thing with HTML. Same thing with JavaScript. It's a never-ending journey. Okay, but I want to say hover. So what I'm saying here is that whenever this is hovered, that's what I'm targeting. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here with the button, hover. Okay, and so now this rule, what I can do is I can say, hey, whenever you hover over those things, I want the color, and I'll switch what I'll usually do is just change the color. So the color will be now the same color as the background. And the background color will be the Alice blue. Okay, so essentially it's going to switch colors whenever I hover over it. So now when I hover over the button, say I get this nice little transition effect. That's really nice. Okay, makes it more obvious that maybe these buttons might be clickable. Okay, cool. Now I want to actually make it actually go somewhere. So to actually make something a link that you can click on, what you have to do is you have to wrap it in what's called an anchor tag. So this is an A tag. That's called an anchor. So I want to wrap the button in this A tag. And then what you do is you put href equals, and then here you put the URL. If it's a link to a website that's at a different domain, you have to put in the whole URL. So HTTPS, yada, yada, yada. If it's a link to something in the same web page, so it's part of the same domain, it's part of the same file, like this other.html, which is in the same folder, what I can do is I can put like /other.html. Okay? Because basically it's going to, basically when you don't put the full address, HTTPS, yada, 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 it's always just going to take whatever the current domain is and then append whatever you put here to it. Okay? So if I do this, now if I click on my cart, see it takes me to other.html. Because essentially what it is, it took the domain name that I'm currently on, which is the 127.0.0.1550, and then just appends that to it. That's essentially what happens when you don't put the full address. Now, if I wanted to go to google.com, watch what happens. It won't work if I just type in google.com. Okay, so if I go back, refresh, now I click on this button that's supposed to take me to google.com, watch what happens. See, it fails because, see, it takes whatever you typed in there and appends it to the end of the existing domain because it thinks you're trying to link to another page in that same website. So if I really wanted to link to google.com, I have to make sure I type in https://google.com, the full directions. So now if I click on this link, it takes me where I'm going. It takes me to google.com. Okay. Cool. And let's do sort of like the second navigation bar. Let's get that second row out of the way. Okay. And let's just first take a look at the original. And this is generally a good way to practice. Take a look at an existing website and then just try to kind of like model off of it. But I see here it's like a row. It's like light gray. And basically we have these little menus. Okay. So basically, very similarly, in the second nav bar, we're also going to have a div. And the cool thing is you can write your divs a lot faster if you use Emmet. With Emmet, what I can do, again, that's built in the VS Code, I can type in the name of the tag, so div, and then use CSS to kind of specify what I want. So I want this div to have the class of left. And then I want another div right below that that has the class of right. Because see, it's like dot right. So div dot right in CSS would mean a div with a class of right. So then I can hit enter, and then Emmet will translate the CSS selector into the HTML equivalent, which is really, really cool. Okay. And then, okay, now when I think about it, if I take a look at this, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, there's like 8 menu items there. Okay, so I'm going to need 8 divs to represent those menu items. Okay, or actually, let's make them, yeah, a div would be the right choice. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'll use Emmet and I'll say div, okay, and we'll call them .menu item. That'll be the class, but we need 8 of them, so I'm going to say times 8. Okay, and see, it gives me 8 of them. So that was a lot quicker to write. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is save myself time. I can hold the Alt key. I'm on Linux. I can hold the Alt key, so it might be different on a Mac. But I hold down the Alt key and I can make multiple cursors so that I can type into all of these. And instead of typing each individual, I'm just going to type item, just as a placeholder. Okay, and we go here. We can see like, hey, look, there's the 8 items. Okay, and then I'm going to go over here to write. And the only thing I really want there is another link that says like sign in register. Okay, and there's just one thing, so we can just probably just make it say sign in register. Okay, so very similar. I want this left and right to be a row. Right now they're not. They should be stacked on top of each other. See, they're stacked on top of each other. So I need to use that flex box to kind of put them in the same row. So the flex box should be this nav bar element. So that way the left and the right that are inside of the nav bar will stack right to left. Okay, so I'm going to head over here, create another style, target, nav bar. Okay, and then we're going to say again, display flex. And now when I look at that, okay, cool. So let's see the items. But again, the items inside of that other div are still stacking on top of each other. I want those in a row. So now I need to go like dot navbar dot left. Okay, I want those to also be treated as a flex, display flex, because I want those 8 menu items inside that particular div to be treated like as a row. So now I look at it and now they're all in a row. Okay, so far so good. But again, I want the 2 blocks pushed away from each other. So over here in the nav bar, which is again the one that contains the right and the left div inside of it, I'm going to say, hey, I want the space between them to be space between. So I say justify content, space between. Okay, and see now sign in registers over here, but again, that's too much, like the 2 off to the right and 2 off to the left. So I need to make sure I set the width up just the same way I did before. I can just copy the exact same width as I did before. So that's on here. So it's with 85%, margin auto. I'll just copy that off into here. That should be in here, navbar. Okay, and see now we're starting to see like, hey, look, that's starting to look right. Now, in the original, that row is a little bit gray, so we should probably make it a little bit gray. Okay, so let's say background color, make it a little bit gray, say like light gray. Okay, and again, if I take this off, so you kind of see it coming together. Okay, a little bit different because they had the row go all the way to the right, so chances are what they did is they just use margin or padding to kind of push this stuff to the right. Okay, or even had like another div inside of a div. So you have one div that's going across, and then you have another div that's only taking up this space. There's a couple different ways you can kind of achieve that effect, but you're kind of seeing the idea. Now let's kind of style that up a little bit more. So let's do like padding 8 pixels to make it the text not so clustered. There we go. Okay, and then what we want is we want each of those menu items to not be so clustered next to each other either. So we're going to say dot navbar dot left dot menu item. Okay, and we want to give those a little bit of margin. We'll say like 4 pixels, just enough to make them not touch each other. Okay, that's fine. Then we're going to make the font size a little bit bigger. Font size, we'll say 1.1 EMs. Okay. And then we'll say, let's make that margin a little bit bigger. And the cool thing about margin is you can actually set 2 numbers for margin. So like the way it should work is top, bottom, left, and right. So 4 is good for top, bottom. For left and right, I'm going to make it 10 pixels. Okay, so see that spaces them out a little bit better. Okay, and then we're going to want to change that font color to something that just kind of looks a little bit better on that gray. See if we use that. How does that look? Maybe. After I make a few changes. Okay, we can change the font family. So we'll just choose a random font. There's all sorts of different fonts you can change things to. Okay, and then I want to make it all caps. So what would be called a text transform, capitalize. So now they should be all caps. That didn't. Oh, I think it's not capitalize transform. It's uppercase. There we go. Okay, item, 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 item. Cool. Cool. And we're going to want to transition on there too. So I'll just copy the same transition from the previous one. So because the rules should generally be the same for this purpose. And then again, now when it hovers, we'll just make it swap background color. And so background color will be, and the color will be Alice blue. So now, well, I forgot to add the hover pseudo selector. Hover. There we go. So now if I hover over them, so I get that nice little effect. Okay. But you're trying to kind of see how this all kind of comes together. So the basic idea is when you plan developing your website, you do generally want to think about it as rows and then work on it row by row by row and kind of get each sort of row of the page kind of where you want it. And again, links, they're just clickable things, and anything you can wrap an A tag around becomes clickable and linkable to somewhere else. Okay, but hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'll see y'all later. Have a great day and enjoy.